Hello, survivors. Do you want to be part of the next stories? Comment below your name and the situation you would like to be in. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's begin. Listen, I need to get this down while I still can. While the memories are fresh and the diesel generators are still humming. My name is Staff Sergeant Cole Hendricks, and I've been stationed at Fort Knox for 8 years. 8 years of guarding the most secure facility on American soil. Gold reserves, classified documents, emergency command protocols, all locked behind 3 layers of defenses that could withstand a nuclear strike. I never thought I'd be grateful for those defenses. Not until October, when the world went to hell in 12 hours. It started like any other Tuesday, 0600 Reveille, 600. Same as always, PT formation in the crisp autumn air, breath visible in the morning cold. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the Kentucky landscape in shades of amber and rust. Perfect weather for a morning run around the perimeter road. I remember joking with Corporal Travis Ewan about how the new recruits looked half dead during the 5-mile circuit. Private Jackson, just 19, fresh out of basic, was practically green around the gills by mile 3. "Think he's gonna make it?" Ewan asked, grinning as Jackson stumbled through another stride. "Kid's tougher than he looks," I replied, but I was already planning to have a word with him about conditioning. Fort Knox demanded excellence, even from the new blood. If I'd known what half-dead actually looked like, I wouldn't have been laughing. After PT came breakfast in the mess hall, powdered eggs, burnt coffee, and the usual complaints about both. Sergeant Walsh was holding court at his usual table, regaling anyone who'd listen with stories from his deployment in Afghanistan. The man had been at Knox longer than anyone, knew every inch of the 3 defense perimeters like the back of his scarred hands. "Mark my words," Walsh was saying around a mouthful of toast. "Nothing gets through our outer fence. Nothing. Built to stop tanks, and tanks don't bite." More laughter. We all felt invincible behind those walls. The first sign something was wrong came around 0830. I was reviewing duty rosters in the security office, assigning teams to the 3 defense checkpoints: outer perimeter, inner compound, and the vault bunker complex itself. Standard rotation, nothing unusual. Lieutenant Brad burst through the door, radio crackling against his shoulder like an angry wasp. "Hendricks, I need you to double-check our emergency protocols," he said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning. His usually pristine uniform looked disheveled, like he'd been running. "Something's happening in Louisville." "What kind of something, sir?" I set down my clipboard, noting the tension in his voice. Brad had been my commanding officer for 3 years. The man didn't rattle easily. Mass violence. Hospitals overloaded. Local PD requesting military assistance. He paused, listening to his earpiece, and I watched his face pale. "And get this, they're reporting people attacking with their teeth. Multiple victims, all with similar bite patterns." Bath salts, I figured. Maybe some new designer drug hitting the streets. We'd seen similar reports from Miami, Chicago. Urban violence was getting stranger, but it was still just violence. People on drugs did crazy things. "Could be PCP, I suggested. Makes people feel no pain, gives them superhuman strength." "Negative." Brad shook his head, holding up his hand as another transmission came through. "This is different. Witnesses are saying the attackers won't go down, taking multiple gunshots and still moving." That got my attention. I'd seen combat footage from Iraq, knew what bullets did to human bodies. People didn't just shrug off gunshot wounds, drugs or no drugs. By year 0900, every screen in our command center was tuned to news feeds from Louisville. The morning anchors had that controlled panic in their voices, the kind you heard when they knew something big was happening, but didn't want to admit it on live television. Shaky cell phone footage showed crowds of people stumbling through downtown streets. The quality was poor, distant shots mostly, but something about their movement bothered me. Not the typical rush of rioters or the erratic stumbling of drug users. This was different. "Sir," Specialist Kim called out from the communication station, her voice tight with stress. "We're getting reports from Elizabethtown now, and Bardstown. Same pattern. Sudden violence, people biting, hospitals overwhelmed." Colonel Stives appeared at my shoulder, coffee mug in hand. The old man had been at Knox since before I arrived, and nothing fazed him. But watching those screens, I saw something I'd never seen before in his weathered face: uncertainty. "How far out is Bardstown?" he asked quietly. 43 miles, sir," Kim replied immediately. "Elizabethtown is 27. The dots connected in my stomach before they connected in my brain. This wasn't isolated anymore. Whatever was happening in Louisville was spreading, and it was moving in our direction. "Alert status yellow," Stives ordered. "All personnel to assigned stations. I want a full inventory of ammunition and emergency supplies. Now." The base came alive with activity. 8 years of drills and protocols kicked in automatically. Soldiers moving to defensive positions, weapons being checked and rechecked, communication lines tested. We were a machine designed for security, and the machine was waking up. At 09:30, the first emergency broadcast interrupted regular programming. A stern-faced official from the CDC appeared on screen, reading from prepared statements about a rapidly developing health crisis and advising people to avoid contact with affected individuals and seek immediate medical attention for any bite wounds. Bite wounds. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. "Turn up the volume," Stives ordered. "Symptoms include aggressive behavior, loss of higher cognitive function, and apparent insensitivity to pain," the official continued. "The mechanism of transmission appears to be fluid contact, primarily through bites. We are working with local and federal authorities to establish containment protocols." Containment protocols. The word sent ice through my veins. The CDC didn't use terms like that for drug outbreaks or gang violence. At 09:45, Sergeant Walsh's voice crackled over the perimeter radio, cutting through the tension in the command center like a gunshot. "Command, I've got visual on approximately 30 individuals approaching the main gate from Louisville Pike. Jesus, what's wrong with them?" I grabbed my M4 and tactical vest, muscle memory taking over. "Sir, requesting permission to observe." "Granted. Take UN and Martinez with you. Do not engage without my direct order." The outer observation tower gave us a clear view of the approach road. The October sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and through my binoculars, I could see them clearly for the first time. 30 people, moving in that same wrong way I'd noticed in the footage, but worse up close. Much worse. Their clothes were torn, some completely shredded. Dark stains covered their skin and what remained of their garments, stains that could only be blood. But it was their faces that made my breath catch. Slack, expressionless, like someone had erased everything that made them human while leaving the basic motor functions intact. "Walsh, are they armed?" I radioed, scanning the group for weapons. "Negative on visible weapons, Sergeant, but their faces..." His voice trailed off, and I heard him swallow hard over the comm. "Permission to approach the fence line? Try to communicate?" Standard protocol. When faced with unknown civilians near a military installation, you attempt communication before escalation. But every instinct I'd developed in 8 years of service was screaming at me to say no. "Negative, Walsh. Maintain your position and observe." But Walsh was already moving. I could see him leaving his guard post and walking toward the outer fence line, rifle lowered but ready. Professional curiosity, probably. Same thing that had gotten me through 8 years of military service, the need to understand the threat before responding to it. The first of those people reached the fence just as Walsh got within talking distance. Through my scope, I watched it approach the chain-link barrier without any hesitation, without any recognition that barriers exist to be respected. It pressed against the fence and reached through, fingers clawing at empty air. "Hey!" Walsh shouted, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "This is a restricted military installation. You need to turn around and leave immediately." The thing at the fence didn't respond. Didn't even seem to hear him. It just kept reaching, pressing its face against the chain link until the metal left deep impressions in its flesh. "Sir, can you hear me?" Walsh tried again, stepping closer. "Are you injured? Do you need medical assistance?" That's when it happened. The thing's hand found Walsh's uniform collar through the fence and pulled. Walsh stumbled forward, caught off guard by the strength of the grip, and I watched through my scope as teeth sank into his throat. His scream cut through the morning air like a blade, high and desperate and full of pain. Blood sprayed across the fence in a crimson arc, and the other 29 things immediately turned toward the sound, with synchronous precision. "All units, hostile contact at main gate," I barked into my radio while bringing my rifle to bear. "Walsh is down. Repeat, Walsh is down." My first shot took the attacker in the chest. The .556 round hit center mass, exactly where it should have dropped any human being. But it staggered only slightly. Didn't even seem to notice the wound. Its teeth were still buried in Walsh's throat, and Walsh's struggles were weakening. The second shot caught it in the head, and finally it dropped, but the damage was done. Walsh collapsed to his knees, both hands pressed against his throat, blood seeping between his fingers. He looked up at me in the tower, and I could see the question in his eyes. Am I going to die? I wanted to lie to him, wanted to call for a medic, tell him it would be okay. But even as I watched, his movements were becoming sluggish, his eyes losing focus. Within 2 minutes, he stopped breathing entirely. Within 3 minutes, he was moving again. The transformation was subtle at first, just a twitch of fingers, a slight movement of the head. Then Walsh opened his eyes, and they were different, empty. The spark of intelligence, of personality, of everything that had made him Sergeant Walsh was simply gone. What stood up wasn't my friend and fellow soldier. It was something wearing his face. It pressed against the fence, reaching through the chain link with clawing fingers, mouth opening and closing with mindless hunger. "Command, this is Hendricks," I radioed, my voice steadier than my hands. "We have infected personnel at the main gate. Repeat, we have infected personnel. Requesting immediate lockdown protocols." The response came from Colonel Stives himself, his words clipped and decisive. "All units, Fort Knox is now under Code Black lockdown. Seal all entry points to outer perimeter. Lethal force authorized on any hostile entity. This is not a drill." Code Black. In 8 years at Knox, I'd never heard those words used outside of training exercises. It meant the base was under siege, that normal rules of engagement no longer applied. It meant we were at war. By 1100 hours, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. The 30 infected at the main gate had been joined by more from all directions. Shambling figures emerging from the tree line, stumbling down access roads, rising from drainage ditches where they'd fallen and continued moving. Our perimeter sensors were going crazy, motion detectors and thermal imaging showing movement all along the outer fence line. The automated defense systems came online, floodlights bathing the approaches in harsh white light, 50 caliber gun emplacements that most visitors didn't know existed, swiveling to track targets. The sound of sustained gunfire became our new background music, short controlled bursts from the guard towers mixing with longer strings from the automated systems. "Ammunition report," Colonel Stives' voice cut through the noise. "Tower 1 down to 60%, came the reply. Tower 2, 47%. Tower 3. A pause. Tower 3. We've got a problem. The fence is compromised. I watched through binoculars as a section of outer perimeter fence buckled under the weight of bodies, not from any coordinated assault, but from the sheer mass of infected pressing against it. The chain link wasn't designed to withstand that kind of sustained pressure from dozens of bodies simultaneously. "All units, prepare to fall back to inner compound," Stives ordered. "Outer perimeter is no longer tenable." The retreat began at 11:30, soldiers abandoning their posts in organized teams, covering each other as they moved toward the second defense line. But the infected followed, pouring through gaps in the fence like water through a broken dam. I was part of the rearguard action, helping coordinate the withdrawal from the observation tower. Through my scope, I watched good soldiers make impossible choices. Some trying to save wounded comrades, others forced to leave friends behind when the infected overran their positions. Corporal O'Donnell stumbled during the retreat, caught by shrapnel from an explosive round. Ewan tried to help him up, but a cluster of infected came around the corner of a supply shed faster than either could react. I took the shot from the tower, dropping 2 with headshots, but there were too many. O'Donnell went down under a pile of clawing hands and snapping teeth. His screams echoed across the compound for maybe 10 seconds before they cut off abruptly. Ewan made it to the inner perimeter, but barely. And only because I provided covering fire from above. By 1200, we'd lost the entire outer perimeter. Guard towers abandoned, barracks overrun, motor pool swarming with infected military personnel, former soldiers still wearing their uniforms. The inner compound was our second line of defense. Reinforced buildings, heavier weapons, better fields of fire. But we'd lost nearly half our personnel in the retreat, and ammunition was running dangerously low. The infected owned everything outside the inner fence now, and they pressed against it with relentless determination. At 12:45, Lieutenant Brad found me in the inner command post, reloading magazines with practiced efficiency. His face was grim, streaked with sweat and cordite residue. "Hendricks, Colonel wants to see you. Emergency meeting in the bunker entrance." The vault bunker complex entrance was our final fallback position. Massive steel doors leading to the most secure facility on the continent. Colonel Stives stood there with the 13 other survivors, his uniform torn and blood-stained. 13 out of 212 personnel. The arithmetic was brutal. "Listen up," Stives said, his voice carrying despite the noise of gunfire from the inner perimeter. "Communications are down across the board. No contact with higher command. No word from other installations. As far as we know, we're on our own." He gestured to the massive doors behind him. "These lead to the vault bunker complex, 3 levels deep, completely self-contained, supplied for extended siege conditions. If we can't hold the inner compound, that's our final defensive position." "Sir," Corporal Ewan spoke up, "what about reinforcements? Surely someone's coming to help." Stives' silence was answer enough. Outside, the sound of gunfire was becoming sporadic as defenders ran low on ammunition. The infected owned the surface now, and they were pressing hard against our last conventional defenses. "Prepare for final withdrawal," Stives ordered. "All remaining ammunition distributed among personnel. Emergency supplies loaded and ready. We hold here as long as possible, then fall back to the vault." I checked my watch. 1,300 hours. 7 hours since the first reports from Louisville. 7 hours for the world to fall apart. The massive steel doors of the vault bunker complex stood open behind us like the mouth of a cave. Emergency lighting casting everything in red. Our final sanctuary waited, along with billions in gold reserves and enough supplies to last months. But first, we had to survive the next few hours. The infected were coming, and the inner perimeter was all that stood between them and the most secure bunker on Earth. Outside, something was screaming. Human voices mixed with inhuman sounds, growing closer with each passing minute. The inner compound held for exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on the command center wall when the first breach alarm sounded at 15:17 hours. 2 hours of sustained gunfire, of watching good soldiers make their last stands behind reinforced positions, of rationing ammunition like it was liquid gold. The infected had adapted to nothing. They couldn't learn, couldn't plan, couldn't even recognize patterns. But what they lacked in intelligence, they made up for in sheer numbers. Every bullet we fired dropped one of them permanently, but for every infected we killed, 3 more stumbled out of the tree line or crawled out of drainage ditches where they'd fallen and kept moving. I'd seen urban warfare in Iraq, knew what sustained combat looked like, how it ground down even the best soldiers. But this was different. In Iraq, the enemy got tired, ran out of ammunition, made tactical mistakes. These things didn't fatigue, didn't need resupply, didn't retreat when their position became untenable. They just kept coming, wore down our defenses like water carving through stone. The infected had learned nothing, but they didn't need to. Sheer numbers were their only strategy, and it was working. "Hendricks, southeast corner," Ewan's voice crackled over the radio, strain evident in every syllable. "They're piling up against the fence again." I watched through the security monitors as dozens of infected pressed against the chain link, those in front being crushed by the weight of those behind. But the fence was buckling. metal posts bending under pressure no engineer had calculated for. You don't design barriers to withstand the combined weight of hundreds of bodies pushing with mindless determination. "Roger that, conserve ammunition, headshots only," I replied. Though we both knew ammunition conservation was becoming academic, we had maybe 30 minutes of sustained fire left. Then it would be knives and rifle butts. The infected had overrun every approach to the inner compound. They shambled through the ruins of the outer perimeter, stepping over the bodies of their own kind, without recognition or care. Some still wore recognizable clothing: a mailman's uniform, a nurse's scrubs, a child's school clothes that made my stomach twist. I forced myself to look away from that last one. Training can prepare you for a lot of things, but seeing a 9-year-old with blood-caked fingers clawing at a fence isn't one of them. Their faces were all the same now: slack, expressionless, driven by hunger they couldn't understand or control. No pain response, no self-preservation instinct, no recognition of obstacles or threats. They walked through barbed wire until it stripped flesh from bone, climbed over burning debris that left their clothes smoldering, pressed against electrified barriers until the current stopped their hearts, and then got back up when the power failed. During the afternoon siege, I watched one infected in a business suit walk directly into the burning wreckage of a fuel truck. The flames engulfed it completely, reducing cloth and flesh to charred ruin. But the thing kept walking until the fire consumed enough muscle tissue to make locomotion impossible. Even then, it didn't stop trying to move, just lay there, opening and closing its mouth with persistent hunger while the flames finished their work. At 15:30, Private Davis made a mistake that cost him everything. He was covering the western approach from the motor pool building when his rifle jammed. A double feed malfunction that should have taken 30 seconds to clear under normal circumstances. Standard procedure was to fall back and clear the malfunction under cover, maintaining situational awareness while conducting immediate action drills. Instead, he tried to fix it in place. I watched through my scope as he struggled with the charging handle, head down, focused entirely on the mechanical problem while infected emerged from cover all around him. 3 of them converged on his position before he even noticed the threat. The first was a businessman in a torn suit. Tie still knotted despite the massive bite wound that had taken most of his neck. The second was an elderly woman in a blood-soaked dress. Their approach seemed almost comical until you saw what they did to their victims. The third was harder to identify. Something that might have been a teenager once. Clothes shredded beyond recognition. Face so damaged I couldn't tell if it had been male or female. They brought Davis down in the open, 20 yards from the nearest cover. I had a clear shot from the tower, but taking it would have meant shooting through Davis to reach the infected. And by the time I could reposition for a better angle, it was already too late. 3 minutes later, he was one of them. "Command, this is Lieutenant Brad," the radio crackled. "Western approach is compromised. We're falling back to the admin building." "Understood. All units prepare for final defensive positions," Colonel Stives responded. His voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the underlying tension. We were running out of compound to fall back to. The admin building was our last conventional stronghold before the vault bunker complex itself. Reinforced concrete walls 3 feet thick, narrow fields of fire that forced attackers into kill zones, limited approaches that we could monitor and defend. The building had been designed during the Cold War with the possibility of siege warfare in mind. It could withstand artillery bombardment and had independent power and water systems. If we could hold it, we might buy enough time for… what? I kept asking myself that question as I watched our perimeter shrink. Rescue? There was no rescue coming. We'd lost contact with every other military installation 6 hours ago. The last transmission we'd received was from Fort Campbell, reporting that they were experiencing significant casualties and implementing emergency protocols. Then static reinforcements? From where? If Louisville was ground zero and the infection had spread as fast as the early reports suggested, there might not be any uninfected military units left within 500 miles. Supply drops? Even if command could organize one, we had no way to secure a landing zone with the compound overrun. At 15:45, Specialist Kim's voice cut through the tactical chatter with something that made my blood freeze. Aircraft inbound, bearing northwest, low altitude, single rotor craft, military markings. I grabbed my binoculars and rushed to the highest observation point still under our control. A third-floor window in the admin building that gave us clear sight lines over the compound. There, skimming the treetops at barely 50 feet altitude, was a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter. Olive drab paint scheme, proper military markings, IFF transponder broadcasting friendly codes on the correct frequencies. The aircraft was flying a tactical approach pattern, low and fast to avoid ground fire, using terrain masking to conceal its approach until the last possible moment. Professional flying, the kind you saw from 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment crews who'd perfected the art of flying into hostile territory. Holy God, Ewan breathed beside me, binoculars pressed to his face. They actually came for us. Someone actually remembered we were here. The helicopter circled the compound once in a wide orbit, and I could see the aircrew through the cockpit windows, helmeted figures assessing the situation below with practiced efficiency. The pilot was taking time to evaluate potential landing zones while staying clear of small arms range, noting the distribution of infected and the location of our defensive positions. Below us, the infected were responding to the aircraft with primitive stimulus response behavior. Heads turned upward in synchronous motion, following the sound of rotor blades. Some began walking toward the estimated landing area before the helicopter had even chosen one, drawn by the promise of noise and movement. Fort Knox ground units, this is Rescue Bird Razor 77. The radio crackled with the pilot's voice. We have visual on your position, requesting status update and head count for evacuation. Colonel Stives grabbed the radio. Razor 77, this is Knox Actual. 13 survivors ready for immediate extraction. Be advised, LZ is not secure. Repeat, LZ is not secure. Copy that, Knox Actual. We're coming in fast and hot. Have your people ready to move. Hope. For the first time in hours, I felt something other than grim determination. These guys were pros, probably a SOAR crew. The best helicopter pilots in the world. If anyone could pull off a hot extraction from a compromised LZ, it was them. The Black Hawk came in like thunder, rotor wash scattering debris and infected alike. The pilot chose the only clear space available, the inner compound's vehicle maintenance area, a concrete pad surrounded by infected on 3 sides but with enough room for a quick landing. All personnel, move to extraction point, Stives ordered. Leave everything non-essential. We ran through corridors we'd defended for hours, past positions where friends had died, toward the sound of rotor blades that meant salvation. The helicopter touched down with practiced precision, crew chief already waving us forward with urgent gestures. Ewan was first out of the building, sprinting across 30 yards of open ground with his rifle ready. I was right behind him, watching the infected press against the barriers that separated them from the LZ. The helicopter's engines were loud, but not loud enough to mask the sound of metal beginning to fail under pressure. The first 5 survivors made it to the aircraft without incident. The crew chief helped them aboard while the pilot kept the rotors turning, ready for immediate departure. Everything was going according to plan. Then the fence gave way. It happened all at once. A catastrophic failure of the entire southeastern barrier. Infected poured through the gap like water through a burst dam, dozens of them stumbling and falling and getting back up, all moving toward the loudest thing in their immediate environment. The helicopter. Contact left, someone screamed. I turned to see a wave of infected streaming across the compound. They tripped over debris, fell downstairs, crashed into walls, but kept coming with horrible persistence. The crew chief was shouting something, gesturing frantically for the remaining survivors to hurry. 3 more made it to the aircraft, but Colonel Stives and 2 others were still 20 yards out when the infected reached the helicopter. The first one to arrive was wearing the tattered remains of a Knox security uniform, probably someone from the outer perimeter who'd been overrun hours ago. It slammed into the side of the Black Hawk with enough force to rock the aircraft, then began clawing at the metal skin with fingers that left bloody streaks. "We need to go now." The pilot's voice cut through everything else. "I can't hold this position." More infected reached the helicopter, pressing against it from all sides. The aircraft shuddered under their combined weight. Through the cockpit window, I could see the pilot fighting his controls, engines straining against the drag of dozens of bodies pushing against the airframe. That's when Corporal Ewan made a decision that saved us all and killed him at the same time. He was already aboard the helicopter when he saw Colonel Stives go down under a pile of infected just 10 yards from safety. Without hesitation, Ewan jumped back out and started firing, not at the infected attacking Stives, but at the ones pressing against the helicopter itself. "Get out of here!" he screamed at the pilot. "Take off now!" The crew chief reached for him, trying to pull him back aboard, but Ewan pushed him away. "Go, that's an order." The pilot didn't hesitate. The Black Hawk lifted off with a roar, infected falling away from its sides like leaves in a windstorm. But the damage was already done. I watched from the ground as the helicopter gained altitude, then began to shudder. Black smoke started pouring from the engine compartment. Something vital had been damaged during the ground assault. The aircraft made it maybe 200 feet up before the engine noise changed from a healthy roar to a sickening whine. "Mayday, mayday," the pilot's voice cut through the radio static. "Razor 77 experiencing engine failure. Attempting emergency landing." The helicopter came down hard in the center of the compound, rotors still spinning but losing power. The impact was brutal. I watched the landing gear collapse and the fuselage twist as it hit the concrete. But some of the people inside were moving, trying to get out of the wreckage. That's when everything went wrong. The crash had scattered the infected temporarily, but the sound of rending metal and sparking electronics drew them back like a dinner bell. They converged on the downed helicopter from every direction. Worse, the crew aboard had been injured in the crash. I could see the pilot slumped in his seat, blood streaming down his face. The crew chief was conscious but moving slowly, trying to help passengers out of the twisted cabin. And some of those passengers weren't moving at all. "We have to help them," Specialist Kim said beside me. She was one of only 4 of us left. Kim, myself, Lieutenant Brad, and Private Murphy, who'd made it to the helicopter but jumped out when he saw it was going down. "With what?" Brad demanded. "We've got maybe 30 rounds between us and no way to get through that crowd." He was right. There had to be 50 infected around the crash site, with more arriving every minute. The helicopter was a magnet for every one of those things within hearing range. But I could see movement in the wreckage. The crew chief had managed to get 2 passengers out, both injured but mobile. They were trying to move away from the aircraft, but infected were closing in from all sides. Suppressing fire, I decided. We give them a chance to reach the bunker entrance. "That's suicide," Murphy protested. "We open fire from here. Every infected in the compound will know exactly where we are." "They're going to know anyway," I replied, checking my rifle. "Soon as we move toward the vault, they'll follow. Might as well make those shots count." We took position on the 2nd floor of the admin building, overlooking the crash site. 4 rifles, maybe 8 minutes of sustained fire if we were careful. Not much to work with, but it was what we had. "Target the infected closest to the survivors," I ordered. "Make every shot count." The suppressing fire worked better than I'd expected. Our elevated position gave us good sight lines, and the infected were so focused on the crash site that they didn't immediately react to being shot at. We managed to clear a narrow corridor toward the bunker entrance, dropping infected with headshots while the survivors from the helicopter stumbled toward safety. But Murphy was right about one thing. The gunfire gave away our position. As soon as we opened fire, every infected in the compound turned toward the admin building. Within minutes, they were streaming through the ground floor, moving up the stairs. "Time to go," Brad announced, though we all knew it already. The infected were 2 floors below us and climbing. We had maybe 3 minutes before they reached our position. The vault bunker entrance was 50 yards away across open ground. We could see it clearly from our position. Massive steel doors standing open like the mouth of salvation. But between us and those doors was a killing field populated by dozens of infected. "We go together," I decided. "Full sprint?" Don't stop for anything. We made it to the ground floor before the first infected reached us. The stairwell was clear, but I could hear them above us. Footsteps, scraping sounds, the occasional crash as they knocked over furniture. They'd found our position. The main exit put us 20 yards from the nearest infected. We burst through the doors at a dead run, rifles ready but trying to conserve ammunition for the final push. The infected reacted immediately, turning toward us with synchronous precision. Kim went down first. She was the smallest of us, and when an infected in military fatigues came around the corner of a supply truck, she couldn't change direction fast enough. It caught her by the legs and brought her down hard. Her scream cut through the air like broken glass. I put 2 rounds in its head and kept running. Kim was already gone. There was nothing we could do for her that wouldn't get the rest of us killed. Brad made it to the vault entrance first, slamming against the steel doors with enough force to ring them like a bell. Murphy was right behind him. Then me, all of us gasping from the sprint and the adrenaline and the horror of losing another friend. "Where's the crew chief?" Brad demanded. "Where are the helicopter survivors?" I looked back across the compound and saw them. 3 figures stumbling toward us through the maze of infected, still 50 yards out and moving slowly. The pilot was conscious now but limping badly. The crew chief was supporting another passenger, someone in civilian clothes I didn't recognize. "They're not going to make it," Murphy said quietly. He was right. There were too many infected between them and us, and they were moving too slowly. Even as we watched, the infected were closing in from all sides. "Close the doors," I said. "What?" Brad stared at me. "We can't just leave them." "Look around," I snapped. "We close the doors now or we all die. That's the choice." It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but watching those 3 figures stumble through the compound, surrounded by infected, I knew they weren't going to make it. And if we kept the doors open much longer, neither would we. The massive steel doors began their slow closure, hydraulics whining under the strain. Through the narrowing gap, I watched the helicopter crew make their final stand. The crew chief had drawn a sidearm and was firing at point-blank range. The pilot was trying to stay on his feet despite his injuries. The doors sealed with a finality that shook the floor beneath our feet. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red as the vault bunker's security systems engaged. We were safe now, locked behind barriers that could withstand a nuclear strike. But the silence was worse than any sound we'd heard all day. 3 of us left, 3 soldiers in the most secure bunker on Earth, surrounded by billions in gold reserves and enough supplies to last months. We'd held the line at Fort Knox. We'd protected the vault, but the cost was everything we'd ever cared about. Outside those doors, Fort Knox belonged to the dead, and inside we were prisoners of our own salvation. I checked my watch. 1847 hours. 13 hours since the first reports from Louisville. 13 hours for our world to end. The vault had held. Fort Knox had not fallen. But as I looked at Brad and Murphy in the red emergency lighting, I wondered if that distinction meant anything anymore.